I got a lot of mentions when it came to Frank the Tank yesterday.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I mean, some people love him to death,
Yep.
and other people can't stand him.
Well, the only people who can't stand him are the ultra positive Mets fans.
Okay.
Those are the people. And I was thinking about this too. Like, I don't know if this was the same way, and I don't think it was. Like many years ago in like the 90s in sports talk radio, where if you had a negative opinion about a team, like the fan base hates you now. Like now in sports talk, like the fan base will hate you if you have a negative thought about their team. Where I feel like back decades ago, the fan base would generally be like, okay, this person has an opinion on the team. They don't have to be overly positive all the time. And sometimes you'd get agreement. Yes, this team stinks. I'm glad that you said that they stink. But I notice, especially with the Mets fan who is super defensive right now, that if me or you or Frank or Sal or anybody who's a Mets fan, Evan, says something negative about this offseason, these positive Met fans come out with the clubs and the pitchforks and the fire. And they're like, how dare you? You don't know what you're talking about. David Stearns is the smartest man ever. Steve Cohen's the richest man. It's like, chill out, man. Like, why are you so angry? So to your point, the people that hate Frank are the Mets fans that are so positive that don't want him talking negatively about the team that he likes.
All right, so you and I, we kind of talk practically.
I hope so.
That's what I'd like to think. I try not to get overly emotional about these things. And what I see is a team that's rebuilding, which is what every team should do when they feel like they've hit the end of the road where they've spent all this money and they got very little in return for it on the field. Maybe off the field, they did get something back. Maybe they're not the Orioles. I can tell you that.
Right.
The Orioles are loaded with young stars who are under control for the next 3 to 4 years. That's not who the Mets are right now. The Mets are hoping to get to that point, and the question is will the fan base be patient, or will this GM do something stupid like the previous GMs that we've had?
Yeah.
I mean, look, we all hope for the best, but you have to be realistic. You have to be a realistic fan. And, and the thing that bothers me is that yesterday I said, I don't want to be the New York Islanders holding on to John Tavares and then losing him in free agency and not getting anything back for him.
Sure.
That was in relation to Pete Alonso.
Yep.
Look, I want Pete Alonso to be here long term, just like every other Met does. We all believe he's a 50 home run hitter and he's a 120 RBI guy. He doesn't hit for average, but that's analytics says that doesn't seem to matter. But I just say this. I want them to win. Of course I want them to win. And of course I want to be positive. It's, hope springs eternal, especially when, they come back from Florida and they open their season. And who knows, maybe you do get off to a good start. Who knows, maybe a couple of guys have career years. You never know. I mean, we worry about, I think, the starting pitching, but we'll have Edwin Diaz back. You would like to think that the bullpen is going to be better than it was last year. So all of those things, are positive. But the reality is when you talk about the Mets right now, is there anybody, and it doesn't mean that it's right or it's wrong, but is there anybody that you know of that has any sort of baseball acumen that is claiming that this is a World Series team?
No, absolutely not. Now, I do think, and I have said this before, which is funny because everybody thinks I'm completely hating on them. I do think that they will pleasantly surprise. I don't think they're going to be a 70-win team like Frank said yesterday. I think they'll pleasantly be a surprising team and have a chance in September to give us some juice. I don't think they'll go to the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to be terrible. But this offseason was a dud. There's just no two ways around it. And it reminded you of a Wilpons, Brody Van Wagenen offseason. And I know what David Stearns is doing. He didn't want to lock himself into these big free agent deals. He didn't want to do what Steve Cohen did last year and the year before with Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. I understand that. And they need to rebuild the farm system and all of these things that we know he's trying to do. But what still remains is the fact that they swung hard for Yamamoto. They didn't get him. And after that, they went bargain basement shopping to fill out the rest of the roster to not be locked into long contracts in the future to build this team.
Which I understand. I totally get that.
But don't try to tell me that the 2024 Mets are going to be any good. That's my thing.
I didn't try to tell you that, but I also tried to say, hey, look, if we're halfway through the season and let's say the team is competitive, they'll make a trade to help the team. If the team is not competitive, then they have to sit there and they have to decide whether or not to trade their best player who's in his walk year.
See, I disagree about if the team is good that they're going to make those trades because
those are going to be small trades.
All right, small trades, yes, but no, they're not trading any prospects.
I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying, like, there's other ways to move people, and you never know. I mean, like, all I know is that for both teams in this city. And I do think the Yankees are all in with the addition of Juan Soto. They are all in.
Juan Soto.
Exactly. And they will be making trades at the trade deadline, as they always do. But I think for the Mets and the Met fan, I wouldn't even use the word cautiously optimistic, those two words. I wouldn't use those. What I would use would be hopeful.
Yeah.
Hopeful that they get off to a decent start.
Right.
Hopeful that they can play with the Braves. Hopeful that they can play with the Phillies. Hopeful that when, if they have to, I want them around that trade deadline to have to make a decision one way or the other, and I want it to be clear. I don't want any nuanced or any crap surrounding it. I want to be able to say, okay, this is what they should do or this is what they shouldn't do.
Yeah, and if they are out of it, will David Stearns have the balls to trade away the most popular player that this franchise has seen since David Wright?
You know why? You know why the Islanders didn't do it?
Because they thought he was coming back.
Yeah, but there's another reason. Because they're playing in Brooklyn, and the thought process was what we needed a star and we need to get to the playoffs. And if we feel like we're trading away our star before we can make a run at the playoffs, then we're signaling to our fans, don't come to Brooklyn because there's no reason to come. It's the same reason, that I felt the way that I did when they traded Ryan McDonough and JT Miller. Like, I was like, all right, why am I going to the Garden and why am I paying full on prices for, AHL hockey?
Yeah, right.
So I understand why Scott Malkin and John Ledecky did that, but I also understand that, if my recollection it serves me correct, that I do not want to be in that situation where I'm holding on to a guy just because he's popular when, in fact, if we're out of it and we can trade him and then re-sign him as a free agent like they did with Aroldis Chapman and the Yankees, then that's what I would want to do.
Well, see, I think if they end up trading him, that's very, very unlikely that he comes back. I mean, then I think at that point that relationship is over.
It comes down to money.
Yeah,
honestly, if let's say he's having a decent year, but the Mets are 10 games out of the wild card.
Yeah,
and we're right at the trade deadline. You go to Pete Alonso, say, Pete, look, we have a couple opportunities to trade you to a team that may actually win a World Series. But, we want you to know that we're only trading you because we think we can help our team moving forward, which we'd like you to be eventually.
Yeah.
And if I'm Pete Alonso, I'm like, yeah, I'm all in for that.
See, where has this ever happened, though, with an everyday player like that? Like a reliever is generally what gets traded at the trade deadline, closers, stuff like that. But when has that ever happened when a major piece, a face of a franchise is traded away from a franchise at the trade deadline in a walk year and then comes back and signs with them again in the offseason? That would be a first.
Well, I understand it's a reliever in the case of Aroldis Chapman, but it did help the Yankees, and they brought him back. And like that's the way I would look at it. If, in fact, we were 10 games or so out of a wild card come trade deadline, that's the clarity that I want. Like, if the team is right there, then, of course I don't want to trade them. I want to try to add to the team in any way that I possibly can and hopefully go on and win. We're talking about things that we don't know until we get to July. All right? We're not going to know that until we get to July. But all I'm saying is that this is my mindset. This should be David Stearns' mindset. How do I make my team better for the long run? Now, he just got here. Mm-hmm. So I'm not ripping into him. I want him to use that baseball acumen and try to figure out how to get this team better. And what is it going to be? What is it going to take for sustained success? And it may take a couple years of failure before we get there. I mean, look at the Orioles. The Orioles are one of the hot up-and-coming young teams. And you look at all these young players that they have because they were so miserable and made trades and had high draft picks and the whole thing. And I think that is, the Baltimore model. The Baltimore model is what we got to be looking at.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and they have a new owner now, and obviously things have gone well for them, at least last year, but they were at the rock bottom for reasons that the Mets should not be rock bottom. They had a miserable owner who didn't connect with the fan base, didn't invest in the team properly, was just a total jerk, which is the opposite of what the Mets are supposed to have in a guy who's a Mets fan. He's the richest owner in baseball. He's going to do whatever he can to win in 5 years of championship. So that's why it's hard to make a comparison to some of these other teams that have had bad ownership and not as much money as Steve Cohen had.
But he also, he spent a ton of money last year.
He did.
And he's still spending it this year just on players that are on his roster right now.
He's using the Sean Marks model is what he's using.
He's using the Sean Marks model, right? Paying guys not to play for you.
Yep.
But the difference between the Sean Marks model and the Steve Cohen or David Stern's model is that, okay, we're paying people salaries, but we got the top end prospects in return for those players. So essentially that's what he did. But he's still paying, a luxury tax salary structure this year.
Yes, he is. Major number.
Right. Yep. But it's like I always say, what I always tell you, it's not how much you spend, it's how you spend it.
Right. And I think that is why David Stearns is here. That's that reason right there, is that he is a guy who was able to build a winner, not someone who won a championship, but build a winner in a place that didn't have the same resources as the Mets have. And he's going to do the same thing. And then when he can go all in or keep somebody or wherever, he's going to have an owner now that's going to support that. So that, in theory, should be the perfect marriage. It's just that you got to go through this crap first.
Exactly. And I understand why Frank the Tank becomes such a lightning rod. Because he does come with a pessimistic take on things.
Yeah, but I mean, we go around and around and around with this. But is it pessimistic or is it realistic?
Yeah, I know.
Because as I mentioned before, Kevin Clancy, KFC, those two guys go crazy back and forth with each other with the positive and negative Met stuff. And then Frank's always the one at the end, like, with the championship belt on. Like, I told you. Look at what happened. I mean, last year's the greatest example of that. I mean, and even at the end of the previous year, how do you look at that season? 101 wins, okay, but they got their asses kicked in the playoffs, and it was embarrassing, and they got swept by the Braves when the division was on the line.
Like, when I look at the Mets, it happens to a lot of teams in football too, and it does happen in like the Knicks are going through it right now with all their injuries, and thank God the break came now. I don't want to see a 4-game losing streak turn into a 10-game losing streak. But, when I think about the Mets, it all came down to injuries, availability of players, and how many guys did get injured and were unable to put together consistent years. It was a hodgepodge. Starling Marte is hurt. Scherzer's hurt. Verlander's hurt. I mean, guys hurt all over the place. Edwin Diaz gets hurt in the World Baseball Classic, for God's sake. I mean, you had so many different little things happen to this team last year that they were unable to overcome, whether it be Buck Showalter or the freaking analytics geeks up on the third floor over there at Citi Field.
Yep.
I mean, it didn't matter. I mean, injuries happen, and if you don't have players playing up to their best who are not injured, then you're going to have the kind of season they had last year. And that's why we have a bad taste in our mouth. It goes back to last year, and it goes back to like how disappointed we all were. I mean, but I'm telling you, we got disappointed because of injuries. Killed us last year.
Yeah, but there was also a lot of underachieving from guys. I mean, they didn't have the same.
Jeff McNeil didn't have the batting title, and I understand that Pete Alonso is so streaky that for 3 weeks he gets one hit.
Yep.
I know it's extreme. I know it's extreme, Met fans, so just calm down. But then there's 3 weeks where he'll have like 10 home runs.
Yeah. It is funny how literal people take some of the things we say.
Holy Christ, it's unbelievable.
There's some account that I saw. I actually had to give you mute a conversation because you get so many responses from it. So you just see constantly, I'm like, God, I got to mute this conversation. So I was talking about Steve Cohen and said, in this offseason, with David Stearns, they signed 15 schmucks you never heard of. And the amount of people that took that literally were like, well, they signed 8 guys and 2 of them were former Yankees, so I don't know what you're talking about. No, the point being is that they had a very, very quiet offseason, and they didn't bring in any big names like Steve Cohen told you he was going to bring in. So, like, and the defensive nature of this Met fan right now is just crazy. Like just, I don't understand. It's like they work for the team. Honestly.
Well, it's good to have a passionate fan base, and I think we're passionate too, but I also like to try to be balanced.
It doesn't have to be so, like, over-the-top propaganda. You know what I'm saying? Like, just, like, be realistic about it.
You know, it's like when I watch a Ranger game. Love the guys doing the game. Love Sam. Love Joe. Think they do a great job. But, you know, how many times are they going to let people get behind the defense in front of the goalie and shoot point blank? There must have been 9 of those last night against a crappy Montreal team. But, this guy's great. Oh, that guy's great. Well, he's a great player. He's got 4 assists. Hey, you know what? You got to play. You got to play goddamn defense if you want to win.
Yeah. It's like Wally Zerbiak, you know?
What about Wally Zerbiak?
Wally never goes in hard and criticizes the Knicks. You know what I'm saying? Never does it. Everybody's great.
That's what we're here for. We try to keep it real.
Keep it real. That's right.
Reals.